Hello, we are going to get started here in just a moment. We're just going to give people another couple of seconds to get signed in, get joined in. Super excited to be talking to you today all about dogs, all about canines, and nurturing trust through listening, which is a topic that I'm super excited to talk about. So how can we watch our dog's behavior and learn how to nurture trust, and how can we change our behavior to nurture trust? I think two things that we could always talk about more and more and more in our society. So as we get started, just a couple of things. So you should all have access to the chat. So if you're having any questions or confusions or would like something repeated, anything like that at all, absolutely, please feel free to chime in, put that in the chat. We have our absolutely fantastic HABIC GRA, Amelia Malone, is on the call as well, and she'll be helping to monitor that chat and get those questions answered for you. Okay, so I wanted to start off with a story about one of our HABIC dogs, this handsome boy. His name is Cabo, and he does amazing work as a therapy dog in the schools. He's a super, super sweet, loving boy, and his placement for him is just perfect, going into the schools and working with the kiddos. But that was not always the case. He had actually started going to long-term care facilities, which we thought he would adore. He loves getting pets. He loves older people. So we just thought like this was going to be the perfect placement for him, was going into these long-term care facilities. But after just a couple of weeks, his owner started noticing that he would like balk at the door when he got there. And then when it was time to leave, he would like pull her towards the parking lot, which was super uncharacteristic for him. So luckily, his owner noticed that really quickly, and we were able to intervene and kind of look at the situation. And we ended up finding him a new place to volunteer, and he absolutely loved it. So now he's bringing joy to so many kiddos, and it's really fantastic. But this was only possible because his owner was paying really careful attention to him and making sure that his needs were fulfilled. He was really thriving and enjoying on the work. And so now he is having a tail wagging good time, I think, if he was able to tell us he loves where he is now. So hello, my name is Kate Miller. You might be wondering who the heck I am and why I'm here talking to you about dogs. So yeah, I'm Kate Miller. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at HABIC full-time. So I'm the animal trainer and volunteer coordinator over here at Human Animal Bond in Colorado. I also teach a couple classes for the HAI Master's Certificate that I'll mention really briefly later on in this presentation. I get to work a lot with the Collar Scholars on campus. So there's a whole club of undergraduate students who are raising puppies to become future service dogs for people with disabilities. And I'm a puppy raiser for that organization also. And then I'm working on my PhD studying dogs and training and behavior. So there is a theme to my life, which is dogs. And I'm just super excited to be chatting to you today about this topic. So before we get too far, I wanted to mention that HABIC works with therapy animals. And so a lot of our focus today is going to be focused on therapy animals. So I really quickly just kind of want to define what exactly a therapy animal is, and kind of frame it in the fact that animals offer us a ton of support, and especially dogs. They interact in our lives in many, many different ways. So that being said, there's a lot of different roles that they can serve. So they can be a service animal, an emotional support animal, a therapy animal, and all those different animals do very different things. So I just want to be really clear about what we're talking about. So service animals are probably the most well-known. They are defined by the ADA as animals who are individually trained to do work or perform tasks for people with disabilities. So to be a service animal, each and every one of these things has to be true. Important to note here that that work or task they're performing is going to be above and beyond sort of offering support through their presence. So they have to be doing like a specific task. We can talk more about that if you have questions about that for sure. But if you were just there for sort of emotional support, the dog would need to be doing something sort of above and beyond that, like blocking the person. So some people who are intimidated by crowds, the dog might actually stand between the person and the crowds. Some dogs are trained to lay on top of their people and do like deep pressure therapy, which is really cool. But anyway, so lots of very cool tasks that service dogs can do. Also, at least at this current point in time, the ADA defines service animals as being either dogs or miniature horses. So if you hear of someone with a service cat or a service monkey or a service any other species, they're not legally going to be considered a service animal. They have to be either a dog or a miniature horse. Okay, so emotional support animals, let's briefly talk about how they fit into all of this. They are defined by the Fair Housing Act, so also known as ESAs for short, which stands for Emotional Support Animal. So the Fair Housing Act has really recognized that animals are really significantly beneficial to mental health. So therefore, an ESA can live in a housing where there might typically be a no pets policy. So importantly, an ESA also does not need to pay a pet deposit or pet rent or any other sort of housing related additional pet expense. And because of this really makes ESAs important in terms of equity. So you can think about if someone has a lower income, they're going to be more likely to be either renting their home or living in a place with a no pet policy. They might not have the financial option to live somewhere where they could own a pet. So ESAs make it possible for people in all different walks of life to be able to have the mental health benefits of having a pet. So most simply put, ESAs are companion animals. They do not gain any public access, just like your cat or dog at home does not gain any additional public access. So they don't require any sort of specific training or specific certification. Their role is to be a companion animal to their person in their home. So of course they can go anywhere in public that any companion animal can go, but they don't get to go to a grocery store or movie theater or restaurant, just like your dog or cat at home wouldn't be able to do those things. Okay, so then last but certainly not least, we have therapy animals. And again, therapy animals are the ones that HABIC in particular is working with. So therapy animals are special because they get to visit lots of people. So far, we've talked about service animals and ESAs, and both of those are specific to one individual. So either to one individual with a disability or to one individual who's benefiting from that mental health benefit. But therapy animals get to go out into the community and spread love and joy to lots and lots and lots of different people. They go to nursing homes, hospitals, schools, and a lot of other places too. They do come to CSU and sometimes other college campuses too to help students to de-stress. And a lot of times these dogs and their owners are going to be volunteers. So most of the time what we see is there's a person with time to volunteer and a super friendly companion dog at home. So they'll go through the training process to become a therapy team, and then they get to go out and volunteer in the community. So a lot of times these dogs aren't actually bred and raised for this work. They can be on occasion, but most of the time it's just your friendly companion dog at home. And so usually what we hear is somebody will say like, my dog loves people. They love people so much. It's the best part of their day. And so I'm doing this for my dog to be able to go out and visit all of these other people. And then once they're a volunteer, they get to go out and their dog can share that love with the people in our community that a lot of times kind of need it the most. So therapy animals have limited public access. So that limited public access means that they can go where they are specifically invited, but only when and where they are specifically invited. So if your dog is volunteering at a de-stress event at CSU, that's wonderful. They get to come on campus and be a part of campus, but then they don't get any other additional access, not even to CSU. So maybe they got to come to their de-stress event. That does not gain them access to different classrooms or offices or anywhere else even on campus. Or maybe they came to a de-stress event in the education building. We do them quite a bit in the education building. They don't get to come hang out in the education building outside of those therapy dog hours. So it's really specific to when and where they're volunteering. And then, of course, they don't get any additional public access either. So they don't get to do the grocery stores, the mall, any of those places that a dog wouldn't typically be allowed. Let's see. And oh, so I just wanted to mention too that if you've ever gotten to work with a HABIC team, this is why there's always permission forms and like signed agreements everywhere that the dogs go, because really for the dog to legally be there, we have to have that person saying, yes, we invited the therapy dog to come into this space. So that might be something that you've noticed if you've ever gotten to work with some of our HABIC dogs. So these dogs are screened and trained. Most therapy dog organizations across the board are going to have some sort of screening process for behavior and medical purposes. Some organizations do require some level of training as well. At HABIC specifically, our dogs are screened behaviorally by a HABIC staff. They get screened medically by their veterinarian. And then they go through a 12-week training class where we train both the dogs and the handlers on things like basic obedience skills, how to respond to sudden environmental changes, how to keep the dog under control, and how to do all of this while we're modeling the human-animal bond. So having really kind of playful and friendly interactions that we can model for other people as well. There's no national accreditation or any sort of laws in place for these therapy animals. So every single different organization is going to have different rules and different guidelines. So those can be really pretty drastically different between organizations. Okay, so now we can dive into an introduction to HABIC and what we specifically do on campus. But I did want to pause, see if there's any questions popping up in the chat, or see if anybody had questions about sort of those different types of support animals that we see in our communities.
Kate, there is one question in the chat from Erica, and they asked, in the past, I heard a distinction between a therapy dog versus a visiting dog. Is that still a thing?
Interesting. I'm not sure that I have heard the term a visiting dog. I suspect that's going to be really similar. I don't know that I've ever heard a definition of a visiting dog. I'd be curious to follow up with you on that and kind of see what that context was, or if that's just sort of how they referred to a dog coming and visiting the facility. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have a definition for that one.
Erica is typing, and I can also try to unmute her if it's easier to talk that way. Or if it's easiest to just follow up after the presentation, that's also totally fine.
Yeah, let's give Erica just a second to maybe finish typing. And yeah, if she's comfortable unmuting, she definitely will be welcome to kind of say what that situation was, because I'd be really curious. I will say that these three types of animals aren't an exclusive, exhaustive list. So we also have things like facility dogs that are sort of like full-time therapy dogs. So they're usually trained and raised more like a service dog who's working full-time, but then they're working in a capacity that's much more like a therapy dog. So there's definitely nuances that happen here too.
Erica, just so you know, I did change your access so that you can unmute, so you're welcome to unmute now. You should have access. Still says you can't do that.
We haven't tried this unmuting function before, so apologies if we're lying.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It says it's allowed on my end. Well, maybe it would just be easiest to follow up after the call then if the unmute function isn't working.
Yeah, let's pause there. And if we have time at the end, we can circle back. And then if not, yeah, we can definitely follow up too.
Okay. In the chat, she did mention what I'd heard before was therapy dog equals dogs trained to perform therapy such as OT, PT, etc.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So that's kind of maybe getting into a little bit more of the nitty-gritty of different roles that therapy dogs can play. So we can have sort of different types of therapy dogs, and all of that to say that the term therapy dog can actually be really can be a little bit deceiving because our dogs aren't performing therapy. Licensed mental practitioners perform therapy. As much as we love our dogs, that is not actually a skill that they have. So there can be a difference between like animal assisted activities where they're sort of doing these de-stress, meet and greet. They just get to visit with lots of people and meet and greet and make them feel better. And then there's animal assisted therapy, and so AAT, and that is much more related to partnering with a licensed practitioner, an OT, a PT, a therapist, someone like that. So they're working specifically alongside with someone, and that practitioner is setting really specific goals and conducting goal-directed interventions with their dogs. So that might be a little bit of the difference that we're thinking about there. But that might be getting a little bit too into the weeds of different therapy animals. So yeah, like I said, we can circle back to this at the end if we have time. And again, I'd love to follow up, but for now, let's dive in and just make sure everybody knows a little bit more about HABIC and who we are. So we are a nonprofit center within the Colorado State University School of Social Work, and we're in the College of Health and Human Sciences, and we were founded in 1993. So we are self-funded. We rely completely on donations and grants, and we have a staff of 3 full-time people. We have a GRA and another one coming on board. I was going to say how many people we have. I'm not sure off the top of my head. But we do have some paid employees that are able to run all of this. And we have our mission statement here. So to improve the quality of life for people of all ages, and I would say and all abilities as well, through the therapeutic benefits of companion animals. We do that in 3 key ways: community engagement, which is pretty much what we've talked about up until this point, education, and research. So a little bit more about the community engagement piece. We do go to a lot of different settings across our community. So we get to go to hospitals, long-term care, schools, addiction recovery, mental health, hospice, and of course, we come to CSU. So this is just a shameless plug to visit us at a de-stress event. You can follow us on social media to follow those different locations. Maybe Amelia, would you be able to stick our Instagram handle into the chat for people? I think it's just at Human Animal Bond Colorado. And that is the best way to follow us, and you too can come visit us on campus and see the dogs. And then in terms of education, we do have some educational opportunities. One of those is the graduate certificate in social aspects of human-animal interactions. So very, very long name, but really cool graduate certificate that you could get involved in or tell your students about. It is offered completely through CSU Online. It consists of 3 different courses that are offered. One is in the fall, one in the spring, and then one in the summer. So it's 9 credits in total, and then it could be completed in 1 calendar year if you took one in the fall, one in the spring, and one in the summer. And then just a really quick nod to research. We've been able to sponsor some really fantastic human-animal interaction studies across campus. A couple years ago, we were able to fund $500,000 thanks to an incredibly generous gift in seed grants that we were able to distribute across CSU for this research. All right, I'm guessing there aren't too many questions about HABIC, but we can pause really quickly there just in case they are. And then we can dive into some of really the meat of what we want to talk about today.
No new questions in the chat, Kate, just so that you know.
Awesome. I was going to say no new questions in the cat. This week is dogs. It was last time we were talking about cats. Okay, so dog body language. So really body language is going to be your dog's first language. When we talk as humans, we use a lot of words, but dogs use their bodies to do most of their communication. They're really highly social animals, so they've evolved to be really cooperative with others, with other dogs and with us as well. So they have lots of really subtle ways of communicating to work through emotions, work through feelings, and really communicate in a way that's really They can tell their little cohort of humans and or dogs how they're feeling, if they're getting upset about something or stressed about something, in a way that they can communicate that without causing injury to the people or the animals around them. So that's a really important part of how they ended up being where they are today, and how there's so much subtlety in all of their different cues. Okay, so what are they actually saying? Let's dive into that a little bit. So first of all, wagging tails are a myth. A wagging tail does not always mean a happy dog. So I think about this like laughing. If aliens were to come down to Earth and describe human body language, they would probably say that when a person laughs, it means they're happy. And a lot of times that would be true, but not always. I think we're all familiar with the like uncomfortable laughing when we just don't know what else to do. Like laughing can be associated with a lot of different emotions. Same thing with the wagging tail. A wagging tail can be associated with basically any emotion that your dog is feeling. That being said, there are two types of tail wag that I pretty much always deem to mean a happy dog. And both of them involve a lot of movement in the tail and the body. So one of those is a helicopter wag, where the dog is wagging in like a big circle. And so it almost looks like a helicopter. And the other one is a full body wag. So their tail is wagging so hard back and forth that like their whole butt is swinging, their whole back end is swinging with their body. So if you see those types of tail wags that just have a ton of movement, rest assured that is very likely going to be a pretty happy dog that you're looking at. On some of the other extreme ends, though, you can have a very fearful dog. So I think most of us would look at this dog and say he is not very comfortable, or she is not very comfortable. So that tail tuck, but that tail tucked could also be wagging, especially if it's a sign of appeasement. So they're sort of tucking their tail and saying, please don't hurt me. And so there's a little tail wag there, but that little tail wag doesn't mean that they're doing okay. Even aggressive dogs who are feeling very aggressive in that moment can have a wagging tail. Sometimes this is actually called a tail flag. So we'll see this with a lot of sort of dog-dog introductions that are happening through a fence or on leash, where the dogs are standing very forward, direct eye contact, they're sort of locked in, and their tails are straight up and sort of waving, and that's what the tail flag is called. And so what the dogs are saying to each other is like, I do not want you to come closer to me. I want you to stay away. And what we hear the owners say is, oh, look, their tails are wagging. And then almost as soon as the owners say this, the dogs start lunging, barking, growling at each other. And a lot of times the people are just totally taken off guard. They're like, what, where did that come from? But the dogs were really clear the whole time. Through the rest of their body language, they were saying, I do not want that dog to be near me. I do not want to be near to this other dog. So all of that to say, it's really important to watch the whole dog when we're looking at dog body language. So we're going to talk about some like specific things, but we kind of have to look at what's happening with the whole body, and not just kind of hone in on just their tail, just their ears, just their eyes. We kind of want to have the whole picture whenever we're talking about dog body language.
Kate,
Okay.
sorry
Yes.
to jump in real quick. I did
No, you're
see that
good.
someone in the chat was asking if I'm not sure if everyone is seeing the presentation. I'm seeing it on my end, but
Oh, okay.
one person in the chat says that they're only seeing a gray screen. If
Oh.
other people who are watching the presentation, can you maybe write in the chat if this is an issue for you as well? I'm just trying to figure out if this is an issue for everyone who's watching it or not.
Oh yeah, they're missing a lot of like really cute dogs if they're not seeing the visuals.
Okay, it seems like everyone else can see it, so it must just be
Okay.
an issue with that one person's ability
Yeah.
to view it. So yeah, maybe just change the view of the like you can adjust who is like showing up on the larger screen in the call. Maybe that'll fix it. Yeah, maybe logging off and then back on will help.
Yeah, and if none of that works, we are recording this as well, so you might be able to go back and watch the recording and see the visuals that go along with it too.
Okay, great. Just wanted to check in, Kate, but it sounds like it's working for the most part. So you're welcome
Perfect.
to continue.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so subtle signs of stress and anxiety. So since we are talking, especially in the context of working with therapy dogs, we're not going to focus too much on dogs that are like really overtly aggressive or really clearly fearful. Instead, I want to focus more today on those subtle signs of stress and anxiety. And like I said, that's because when we're working with dogs in the public or working with therapy dogs, we're much more likely to see those really subtle signs of stress and anxiety. And those are the ones that people aren't always, as familiar with either. So they kind of tell us when a dog isn't totally comfortable with the current situation, and it can give us a chance to intervene before the dog becomes even more uncomfortable. So as we're going through these really subtle signs, I just want you to keep in mind, it's really about the frequency of the signs and the whole body language of the dog. So one thing we'll talk about are lip licks. And so often when we start introducing these stress signals to people, they'll start seeing stressed out dogs everywhere you go. So he'll be like, that dog's licking their lips. That dog just did a shake off. Like all of the dogs are miserable. Which probably isn't the case. But once you start seeing the stress signals, you don't unsee them, which is good. But I want to point out that if you see one or two of these little stress signals, it's sort of like somebody maybe picking at their nails or scratching at their hair or something like that. It doesn't mean that that person is experiencing like horrible welfare or anything like that. It's just like, oh, maybe they're a little bit uncomfortable with the situation. If we start seeing quite a few of these stress signals stacking up, or if we start seeing the same one happening again and again and again, that's when we would want to say, okay, we need to step in and intervene for this dog at this point. Okay, so diving right in, first I wanted to talk about the whale eye. So the whale eye is when we're able to see the white of the dog's eye. So this little part here in the little red moon, when we can really see the white of their eyes, that's going to be a pretty clear sign that they're not feeling really great in that moment. And then looking at some of the facial expressions. So if you have a relaxed dog, their eyebrows and their forehead are going to be nice and smooth. You can compare that to the dog on the right. So the dog on the left, loose and happy. The dog on the right has that worried brow where they sort of smush their eyebrows together and raise them up. I think this one is easy for us to recognize because it looks like how a worried person might look. And it's the same for the dogs. So then stress signals, these are really going to happen out of context. So the shake off is a really great example of this because if you see a dog shaking off and they're soaking wet, that totally makes sense. It's in context. They're just trying to dry off. But a lot of times we'll see dogs shake off when they're completely dry. So what's going on there? A lot of times when a dog is shaking off when they're dry, it's sort of like a reset signal. So Taylor Swift nailed it. I want to see quite badly a bunch of dogs doing their shake off to the Taylor Swift Shake It Off song, and that would just make me very happy. Every time I see a dog shake off, that song gets stuck in my head. But it's a really nice signal because it tells us two things. One, it's a really nice reset. So they're sort of like, I shook it off. I think I'm good to go. I'm ready to move on. I feel good. It also tells us that just before they were probably feeling a little bit uncomfortable in that situation. So maybe someone just came up and hugged your dog. They let go and your dog does a shake off. It says, hey, they're feeling okay now. They probably weren't super comfortable with that hug that was happening just a second ago. Okay, so then some more of these subtle signs of stress that are sort of happening out of context. So lip licking when there's no food around, that's a really common one. Yawning when they're not tired is also really common. So I would say, at least with the HABIC dogs that we work with, the shake off, the lip lick, and the yawn are the most common ones that we see for those subtle signs of stress. Panting when not hot is also a common sign of stress. So you can compare again these two dogs. The dog on the left is sort of loose and relaxed and happy. The dog on the right is at the vet's office, very different, much more stressed face, much heavier looking pant. What I love about this set of pictures is that they are actually the same dog. Her name is Clara. She's a feral dog, so she is pretty happy being out in her yard. But when she has to go into the vet's office, it's a very, very stressful situation for her. So, I mean, she doesn't even look like the same dog in these two pictures, but you can really see the difference between the relaxed dog, the loose body language. You can kind of picture her tongue just flopping out the side of her mouth versus when she's at the vet and her whole body is so much more tense. Her eyes are bigger. Her tongue is sort of like forced out of her mouth, much more stressed there. So suddenly not eating treats as long as they're not full. So sometimes when we see this, it could be approaching something that worries the dog. So maybe a dog is worried about traffic. And so you're approaching a busy street. They've been taking treats from you this whole time. You get close to the busy street and they will stop taking treats altogether. As soon as you cross that street, they start taking treats again. So that's a really clear sign that that thing that they're approaching, they're really worried about. We can also have dogs who are hypervigilant or pacing when they're normally slower. So hypervigilance is sort of that swivel head. And you can picture, they're like, what is that? What is that? What is that? What is that? They're sort of looking around all over the place. And then notice you can see the little bit of a whale eye on this beagle too, as you can kind of imagine him just looking at what's going on. Vice versa, if you have a dog who becomes really slow and hesitant when they're normally much faster moving, that could also be a subtle sign of stress. And then we have things like moving away and avoiding. So if you reach out to pet a dog and they pull away from you, they try to get farther away from you, it's a pretty clear sign that they would like distance. Displacement behaviors. So displacement behaviors are really interesting. One, because people do them too, but then two, because I think people miss them a lot or mislabel them a lot. So what a displacement behavior typically looks like is we're going along with our situation, whatever is going on, and usually there's some sort of environmental change that happens. So a new person walks in the room, a new dog walks in the room, there's a knock at the door, something in the environment changes, and then the dog will suddenly become engrossed with a smell on the floor, or they'll stop and get like really itchy, or they just have to stop and scratch and scratch. For dogs who have been trained with a lot of aversives, so maybe they're told to lie down, and if they don't lie down, they're sort of pulled into a down, we'll see that they'll be asked to down. So you'll say, hey, Fluffy, down, and they'll start sniffing. They'll go off and start sniffing instead of laying down. And that, I think, is typically pretty infuriating to us as the human. Like, I clearly told you what I wanted you to do just now. And you're like blatantly disobeying me, right? Like, to quote the Lion King. And so these displacement behaviors, really what they're doing is sort of, there's a situation that they're not comfortable with, so they're sort of trying to disengage from that situation. So you can kind of think about this for people too. So if you're sitting on public transportation, for example, and there is someone on the bus who is acting maybe not in a way that you would expect them to ask, maybe they're using a really loud voice and they just seem maybe dysregulated and we're not quite sure what to do, we'll see a lot of people engage in these displacement behaviors. So super common, you might pull out your phone and just start scrolling through your phone. Some people will start reading the posters on the bus, or you might be like, I never noticed this little piece of my watch before. I'm going to investigate this really carefully. You're trying to disengage and be like, I'm not a part of the situation that's making me potentially uncomfortable. That's the same things our dogs are doing too. Two really common ones that we see are the sniffing behavior and, like I said, when they stop and they scratch. Okay, and then one more myth to leave you with here is that hackles, or that piloerection that we see when the fur stands on end. That is just adrenaline hitting the system. So the hackles get a really bad reputation for the dog being aggressive in that moment, but we see lots of dogs who are really excited to like play with another dog, their hackles will go up too. So again, so important to take the whole body, all of the body language under context here, and knowing that those hackles just mean that the dog is adrenalized. So in a therapy dog setting, we would want to remove the dog if they're adrenalized, because if they are really fearful, if they are feeling aggressive, or if they're that overly playful, probably none of those are going to be appropriate for a therapy situation. So we would probably want to remove the dog if we ever saw that. Adrenaline doesn't always have the best place in an animal-assisted intervention. We want them to be nice and calm and relaxed. So, but yeah, again, just to say that those hackles, that really just means that adrenaline is in that dog system. And then again, those stress signs are all about frequency. So again, if you see one lip lick, if they yawn once, that does not mean that your dog is experiencing terrible welfare. It just means maybe they're not totally comfortable right there. And again, as we start seeing more and more and more of these stress signs, that's when we start to think, okay, maybe I need to take my dog outside or take them home or take them on a walk or do something that's going to be a little bit easier. Okay. And then remember to look for the good too. So I mentioned that a lot of times when we introduce these stress signals to people, we start seeing stressed out dogs everywhere. So it's important to know those stress signals and be able to look for them. You also want to look for those signs in your dog that means they are happy and thriving and they feel really, really good. That really loose, bouncy body language, the tongue hanging out the side of their mouth, the big helicopter tails going. We want to see those things that make us say, I feel great about how my dog is feeling right now. Okay, so just another quick note about somewhere else that we can kind of look for signs about how our dogs are really feeling about something. So when your dog is able to anticipate an activity, that's a really important place to look for their behavioral reaction. So dogs are great at identifying patterns. You've probably noticed this if you've ever had a dog who doesn't like to go to the vet. As soon as it's time to go to the vet, they know and they disappear under the bed. Or as soon as it's time to get a bath, like you cannot get them to come inside from outside. So they're very, very good at identifying what is going to be happening. What we want to see is when they know that they're going to be doing this thing, they are excited about it. So for a lot of therapy dogs, when we pull out that bandana, that means that they get to go to work. We want to see them show really excited body language. They're running to the door. They're super excited to go. And they're not sort of hesitating or moving away. If we see that hesitation, if we see them go under the bed or not want to approach the front door, that's an indication that, maybe we thought they enjoyed this work and they're telling us actually, for some reason, they don't. Another place you can look is when they're approaching the building. So if they know that they're going to go into this building and they're excited and ready and willing to go, right? They're like running up to the door, hopefully under control, but they're loose and excited. Again, they're not sort of balking at the door. They're not moving away from the door. They're excited to go. So just to wrap up this section, our dogs are always talking to us. The question really becomes if we're listening or not. So then we're going to move into harmful labels and assumptions and why sometimes those can be harmful. So just want to pause here again and see if there's any questions.
No questions as of right now.
Awesome. All right, we will move right along because we're getting into the stuff that I really like to talk about now. So I love learning from Dr. Susan Friedman. If you have a chance to follow her work and learn from her, she's absolutely amazing. And she will talk about labels quite a bit. And what she's really good at pointing out is that one of the big problems with labels is that once we label an animal, we stop looking at that specific animal and at that specific environment. So we just sort of say, they are stubborn and therefore it's not even worth trying. So we stop really trying to work with that animal. We stop looking at the environmental factors that could be contributing to why they're doing this behavior. And we stop looking at the animal themselves. So we start missing all of these stress signals that we've been talking about because we say you're stubborn or whatever. And then we don't see some of these signs of fear and stress and anxiety when we're making those assumptions. So common assumptions that we have heard throughout the years: he knows better, she's stubborn, he does that because he's the alpha, they are just lazy, and he is not too bright. So I'm sure we have all heard of those and probably said them from time to time in our own lives as well. So to unpack some of these, One of the really common labels is a guilty dog. So my question to you, is there such a thing as a guilty dog? So the situation might go like this. We come home to a disaster. The dog has destroyed the house. They've chewed the carpet. They've chewed up the couch. They have had an accident on the floor. Things have gone awry. And when we come into the house, the dog looks like this. They give us those big sad eyes. They sort of tuck their head down. They give us this classic guilty look. We say, see, they knew they weren't supposed to do this and they did it anyways. They feel guilty about it. And that assumption totally makes sense. This face is really similar to what a human face would look like if a human was feeling guilty. But this starts to break down when we put it in a laboratory setting. So to test this, researchers sort of set the dogs up. So what they did is they would leave the dogs alone in a room and give them the opportunity to kind of get into trouble, to make a mess. And so if the dog did make a mess, the owner would return, and sure enough, we would get the guilty look from the dog. Sad face. So far, seems like the dog knows I did this bad thing, and so now I feel guilty, and I'm going to tell my owner that I feel guilty. But here's where it gets really interesting. This is where they started sort of setting the dogs up. So now the dog would be left alone in this space, but not left. They wouldn't be left alone. They'd be in the space with another person. And this other person would be the one who makes the mess. This other person makes a mess, disappears. And then the owner comes back in and we get the same guilty look on the dog's face as before. So we started to really question, is this so much guilt that the dog is feeling, or is it something else? And we think there's probably two things happening here. One, the dog is actually showing appeasement signals to the owner. So they've associated the return of their owner with some sort of punishment or negativity. And so when the owner comes home, the dog is saying, hey, I love you, and also please don't hurt me. I know sometimes you're really angry when you come home, and I'm just going to show you that I'm sort of small and innocent. And that's what all those little appeasement gestures are. They lift up their paw, they look at you with the big eyes, and they're like, hey, I'm not here to hurt you. Please don't hurt me either. The other thing they can do is they can actually pick up on the presence of the mess being the prediction that you're going to be angry. So it's so interesting because it doesn't seem like they connect the fact that they made the mess to punishment that might come later. They associate the presence of the mess and the owner's return to something bad is going to happen. So if there is poop on the floor, the dog may have put it there, but it's the presence of that mess on the floor and the return of the owner that causes them to create this guilty face or these appeasement gestures where they're going, oh my gosh, please don't hurt me. Again, I'm just small and innocent. So it can be kind of heartbreaking when we start to break it down and looking at it that way. And important to keep in mind that sometimes our dogs aren't making the sort of cognitive connections that we would make very easily. They're making different connections. So again, the presence of trash on the floor. When there's trash on the floor and my owner comes home, they're usually really mad, but they don't make the connection to go, I put the trash on the floor, so therefore I did something bad. And the problem is when we see this guilty face and we say, hey, my dog is feeling guilty, then we feel justified in that in terms of punishment. So then we feel like we can say they know better. So now if I yell at them or smack them on the butt or anything else, they know what they did. So they know why they're getting punished for it. And the research is becoming more and more clear that they really don't. They're really not able to make that connection. So keep in mind, with your dogs, especially, that if you don't catch them in the act, there's really no way to reprimand them for that act after the fact, after it's happened. So just kind of keep that in the back of your minds. Okay, so another label that's super common. What about these stubborn dogs? So lots of examples of stubbornness. I'm guessing that this pup would be classified as stubborn, who is clearly trying to be pulled on the leash and he is not going wherever he's supposed to be going. But I want you to look at some of the other body language cues that we can see here. So his body is low to the ground, his tail is really low. We see that whale eye that we talked about, and we can see a little bit of that furrowed brow that we talked about too. So if we're looking at the body language without context of what's happening in the situation, I think here we would say this dog is worried and stressed, probably anxious about whatever's happening. So there's no way for us to know what's happening in the context of this photo. But we can look at the body language and say, this dog doesn't seem like it feels totally comfortable right now. So to kind of unpack this myth just a little bit, I want to talk about some of the common reasons why a dog might not comply with something that we're asking of them. One is they might just not understand. So if we say, I need you to walk on this leash, they might not have learned how to walk on a leash yet. They might just not quite understand. And so often, we forget that dogs don't speak English, right? And so sit, down, heel, these words make sense to us intuitively, but it's like telling our dogs raspberry, banana, and they're like, which one was raspberry again? Sometimes they just need a little help remembering what it is they're actually supposed to be doing. They might be too distracted by the environment. So maybe a cat just walked by or a squirrel. They might be too stressed. And I think this one is often really common. So if we're asking the dog to do something like sit or lie down and they're feeling stressed, they're probably not going to be comfortable enough to go into that vulnerable position because, lying down is much more vulnerable than standing up on their four legs. And then the reward. So sometimes, this little pup here, I could imagine if he was trying to leave the dog park and go home, he might have learned that, when it's time to leave with my owner, the fun is over. And why in the world would I want to leave the fun to leave with my owner? So sometimes we have to work hard to be the most exciting, encouraging, rewarding thing so that the dog doesn't learn, hey, when I end play, all the fun is over, and now they associate going with us, with all the fun being over. We want to make sure that we can be really rewarding too. So a really common theme that we've been running into in the animal training world is sort of this distinction between the learning curve and the teaching curve. So a lot of times we put the emphasis of learning on the learner, but especially in animal training, we'll really talk about the burden of learning falling on the teacher or the trainer. So the trainer is able to meet the dog where they're at, they're able to set them up for success, make it easy enough for the dog that they're able to be successful. Okay, I'll pause there again and just see if we have any questions.
No new questions.
Cool. Okay, so now getting into changing our behavior in order to build trust with our dogs. So one thing I wanted to talk about was a petting consent test. So a lot of times we see a dog and we just sort of assume that we get to pet that dog and that dog will like to be pet. And that is not always the case. So a petting consent test looks like this. First, we would allow the dog to approach us. So if we're here, the first thing we want to see is that the dog comes over to us. If the dog's not coming over to us, if they're not sort of closing that gap to see us, they've already said no to petting. So let the dog approach you first, and then you will briefly pet the dog. So just a couple of pats or just a couple of seconds of petting, and then you'll pause. You'll pause and see what the dog does. So we have a couple of different things the dog might do. The dog might lean in closer for more petting. So you might stop and they sort of look for your hand or nudge your hand or lick your hand or nuzzle up into your leg. They're actively seeking more petting. Alternatively, you might actually see the dog kind of scooch away from you when you stop. And they're saying, I'm not feeling like pets right now. I don't feel like being touched right now. And that's okay. It's really important that we're just listening to that dog's answer. So if they're opting into petting, absolutely keep petting them. They love it. But if you stop or if you pause and they sort of scooch away from you, the best thing we can do is let them be, or maybe do some other type of interaction with that dog. Okay, so then some other things that we can do, using treats to change their emotional response. So I put a skateboarder here because I don't even know how many dogs are worried about skateboards, which makes sense. They're loud, they cause people to move really, really fast, and they can sneak up on our dogs. But basically, the idea here is that we would use treats to take this initial reaction of seeing or hearing a skateboard and thinking, yikes, what is that? I don't know. And so we're going to pair it. We're going to pair skateboard with food. And we're going to do that lots and lots and lots and lots of times. Every time there's a skateboard, food, food, food. And eventually what's going to happen is it'll change the emotional response the dog has from yikes to yippee. So, hey, there goes a skateboard. I bet I'm going to get a cookie. And that just changes the whole emotional response that we see from the dog. And then another piece I would like to talk about here when we're talking about some of these changing emotional responses is to avoid luring with treats. So it's a really common thing that we see with people, especially when the dog is worried, and it comes out of like just the most kind-hearted, like we just want them to feel better. We're really trying to help our dog, but we can change it ever so slightly to make it more effective. So typically what we see is a person, maybe this dog is worried about this walker. Sometimes they see medical equipment and they just feel strange about it. So this person would say, it's okay, puppy, come take a treat. And they'll try to lure the dog over to them with a treat because then the dog gets a treat and feels better. The problem is this can actually cause conflict because the dog really, really wants the food, but they don't want to get closer to the person. And so instead of building trust, we're sort of building this distrust here, where they want the food, but we're putting them in a really compromising, uncomfortable situation to get to the food. So instead of doing this, what we can do is actually toss the food away from us and away from the dog. So now the dog can leave to go get the food. Now the dog got two things that it really wants. It got the food and it got distance away from the scary thing. And then we let the dog approach on their own. So what happens within just a couple repetitions of this, and we'll do this all the time in HABIC training, if we see any sort of aversion to a wheelchair, to a walker, to a cane, any sort of thing that we bring out into our training classes, if a dog is a little bit worried about it, we'll do this treat toss where we toss the treat away. The dog goes and gets the treat. We do that a couple of times, and then the dog's coming super confidently right up to the walker, right up to the wheelchair, because really quickly we've built trust. We've said, I'm not going to try to bribe you over. I'm not going to try to kind of trick you to come over. Instead, you're really feeling better about the whole situation. Okay, so then very similarly, I wanted to talk about if your dog is worried about, people coming into your home, or if they meet somebody maybe in public that they're worried about. So if your dog's worried about a person, again, our first temptation is to hand that person a treat and have the person say, oh, it's okay, puppy, come here, come get your cookie. Same thing will happen. The dog will put on safety legs. That's when they anchor their little feet to the floor and they lean their body forward, but their legs don't go anywhere. So they sort of like lean forward, but they're not moving their feet any closer to that situation. We'll see that as they try to get the food and then they'll dart away as soon as they get the food. And that's not necessarily creating trust. So instead we can do something called a popcorn trail. So here the person would have food, but instead of trying to bribe the dog over to them with the food, they can drop it and then they move away. So that gives the dog plenty of distance to come get their food and check it out, and then potentially come closer to that person. And so the person would just keep doing this as like a popcorn trail sort of a thing. They drop the treat, walk away, drop the treat, walk away, drop the treat, walk away. And same thing will happen. That dog will start to really associate that person with feeling good, with feeling safe, not feeling conflicted, and will build trust much, much faster. Okay, the other thing you can do is be the alpha, which probably sounds a little bit counterintuitive. But this idea is coming from dominance theory, which is pretty largely disproven. The idea here is that dogs evolved from wolves, which is true. Every single dog breed we have descended from the gray wolf. Yes, even this dog. But the idea was that wolves form packs, which is also true. The problem is that originally we thought that dogs or wolves fought their way to the top. So they fought their way to be the alpha male and the alpha female, and that is how dominance worked. And that's how they became really the leaders of the pack, as they fought their way to the top. It was only later that we realized this was not the case at all. The alpha male and the alpha female in a wolf pack are actually just the mom and dad, and their pack is their generations of pups. So when we talk about being the alpha over your dog, what we're actually saying is that you need to be a guardian or a really good parental figure to our dog. Okay, so that's really easy to say, but what does it actually mean? There are two things that we really want to be true to be the best dog, parent, or guardian that we can be. The first is that we have clear, consistent rules and boundaries. So the dog's not allowed to jump on people or not allowed to jump on the furniture. That's always the case. It's not changing from day to day or situation to situation. This is the rule, and it will be enforced. It can be enforced gently, let me point out, but that's the rule and that's kind of the expectation. The other piece is that you have a warm, loving relationship with the dog. So going back to the furniture example, if they jumped up on the furniture, doesn't mean that they need to be scolded or physically harmed. But if they jump on the furniture, you train them that they're not supposed to be on the furniture. You redirect them to do something else, something like that. And so it's really the combination of these two things that makes us a really excellent, trustworthy dog guardian. And dare I say it, this is how you become the alpha for your dogs. Okay, we have 4 minutes left. So just in case I've piqued your interest about becoming a HABIC volunteer, I wanted to really briefly go over how you would do that. So what animals do we certify? Dogs and cats. Dogs can be any breed, any size, shape, and color. They just have to be at least 18 months old. And then of course, have the good temperament, want to do the work, be really excited to see people. If you want to become a HABIC volunteer, the really quick overview of that process is first, you'll go through the screening. So that's behavior screening and medical screening. Then you'll do the training, which we do try to have a lot of fun with that training. So here is an example of dogs performing a stadium wave. So that's where the dogs go sit down, sit down, sit down in a line. This is just to really emphasize that we like to have a lot of fun with our training. So this dog, my old dog Dale, just wagging his tail, wagging, wagging, wagging. There's that tail with a lot of movement that we were talking about. The point is that we're trying to bring sort of that fun, playful energy into our training and then into our therapeutic settings as well. There is a final evaluation at the end of all of this, and then there's a reevaluation every 2 years. So then if you're interested in all of this, you would just go to habic.org, click on volunteer, or you're always welcome to contact us at habic@colostate.edu. Okay, so Amelia, are there any other questions that have popped up into the chat?
I see one new one, and they're asking, when it comes to skateboarding and herding breeds, how do you know if they are scared or uncomfortable, or if they just have that instinct to chase?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So the breed question, I would encourage you, and maybe I could track it down if you send us an email and ask for it. There's a really fantastic paper that came out recently that did a huge dive into breed behavior. And breed behavior specifically only explains a very small amount of a dog's behavior, very counterintuitively. So, typically we think a husky is going to pull because they're sled dogs, a herding dog is going to herd and nip ankles. A retriever is going to retrieve, but the more dogs you meet, the more you realize not all retrievers retrieve, not all herding dogs are doing this herding dog behavior. And so even when it comes to those breed-specific behaviors, the breed itself is not a very good explainer of what's happening with that behavior. But going back to that example of, maybe the skateboard, for instance, what I would encourage you to do is kind of break down the different aspects that could be involved in the skateboard. So you have the movement, you have the sound, you have the element of surprise potentially if a skateboard's coming up behind you. So if you can sort of isolate those different pieces and see what is being the biggest trigger to the dog, and then what does that behavior look like too. So yeah, if it's like movement and the dog really just needs to chase, yeah, that really could be both, because it could be they're chasing the skateboard to create distance, to get that skateboard to go farther away from them. It could also be that it's fun to chase the skateboard. So this is where we can bring in looking at a lot of those subtle signs of stress. This is also where it can be really helpful to work with a behaviorist or with an animal trainer and get videos of what that dog is doing. And that can add a lot of context to what's happening. You can also look at the skateboard sort of outside of the context. So you can kind of set up situations where the dog might see a skateboard and look for those subtle signs of stress. Is the dog showing like, hey, there's a skateboard, I'm excited about this? Or are they like, oh my gosh, there's a skateboard, and showing some of those other signs of stress and anxiety? That was like a super, super rapid fire answer. So happy to follow up individually if that person would like to.
That was the only question in the chat as of right now, and I did just want to note it is 1 o'clock. So
perfect. Let's go ahead and end there. Just want to say thanks to everybody for joining, and don't hesitate to reach out and contact us, and enjoy the rest of your day.